our final speaker for the morning is the Honourable Dr. Gary Johns, Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commissioner. Dr. Johns took up the role of Commissioner following a long and varied career in public service and policy advice. He was an inaugural board member of Volunteers Australia, a member of the Prime Minister's Business Community Partnership, and served on the committee to design the redress scheme for survivors of institutional sexual abuse. Dr. Johns was a member of the House of Representatives from 1987 to 1996 and served variously as Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister, Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasurer and Special Minister of State and Assistant Minister for Industrial Relations. He served as an Associate Commissioner of the Commonwealth Productivity Commission from 2002 to 2004. We welcome him to the National Patient Organisation Network Australia Conference to provide an update on the work of the ACNC. So welcome, Gary.
Good, thanks indeed, Anne. The big question, as always, is can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Oh, it's wonderful, isn't it?
And we can hear you loud and clear.
Good, we're getting so used to this. Well, look, first up, and I did listen to the previous speaker, which was very good. I really enjoyed that. So let me applaud your work, I think is the most important message today. Nevertheless, I am the regulator of charities, and to the extent which you operate a charity, I have some thoughts for you today as to how we might assist you, but also, because I'm the regulator, there are certain requirements in registration and keeping that registration going. So there are a few topics I'm going to canvass pretty quickly, but Anne, I believe you have this presentation, so those who need it, there are some notes attached. I'm sure you'll be able to provide it to people. So a little bit on the reporting side, I'll talk about a little bit about governance, because we often get questions about that, and then some innovative things that we are offering to charities and responsible persons, but also to the wider public, so they can actually find charities for what they do. So let's first of all just go to that business of reporting. Now, it seems to me that when I look at charity reports, particularly the financial statements, it doesn't make much sense to me. I'm not an accountant, but as an ordinary person, I'm asking, what do you do as a charity? And when you look at accounts, of course, it's important that you see whether an organisation's healthy financially, but to tell you the truth, I want to have a little insight as to where your money comes from, because that probably says a great deal about you. Now, there are limitations on what I can ask, so we've suggested it's good practice that when you receive money from government, you tell us from which government, maybe how much, and whether it's in form of a grant or whether you're delivering services to beneficiaries. And I'll give you a little example of what I regard as really good disclosure. Now, you'd be overjoyed, I'm sure, to have a balance sheet like this, where you're receiving lots of money from the Commonwealth government, state government, and local government. There would be very few who are this lucky. Nevertheless, the idea here is I read so many financial reports that just say, grant $1 million. Well, okay, it just doesn't tell me anything. So if you break it down and you say, well, it was from the Commonwealth Department of Health, and there was an element of funding from the New South Wales Ministry of Health, and then we picked up something from one of our local councils. It's not for compliance, it's not for me, it's so that you can tell your story more readily. So I get me, say I'm a potential donor or volunteer or want to join the charity, I've got an insight as to what your organisation does, because where you receive your money is a pretty good indication of your organisation. So that's just one. We, I think, published this a year, 18 months ago, and we're simply encouraging charities in in their financial reports. Now, small charities just do the annual information statement, I know, but in the financial reports where you do publish it, you do, well, either put it on your website or furnish it to us. I think it's a good idea to be more explicit about where your money comes from, particularly government money, because we have the power to ask for that, if you like, in your annual information statement. So I'm just being consistent with my internal rules. Now, some more on reporting. The government's passed a number of changes to reporting just late last year. And there are 4 elements that will affect you. You may be aware that we have these 3 categories of charity: small, medium and large, and that affects the detail of their reporting. Small charities only have to provide an annual information statement, which you provide online to me. Mediums can provide a balance sheet, a financial report, but unaudited, and the largies has to be an audited financial report. Now, but the thresholds have changed. They're more generous now. Small charity used to be at $250,000. It's now gone up to $1 million, and a large charity will kick in at $3 million. So small charity now is anything under $1 million, and I can tell you that's way over half the 60,000 charities that are on the register. The mediums are between 1 and 3 million, the biggies above 3 million. So those reporting thresholds will mean that there are many thousands of charities who will no longer have to provide a financial report. For instance, they'll just provide an annual information statement, and there will be fewer charities having to provide the full audited accounts. Now, perhaps as a little offset to that, number 13 there talks about a statement of resources and commitments. Now, this is for small charities. Small charities will often just have a cash accounting, how many dollars in and how many dollars out. And believe me, it tells me not a lot. So we're encouraging, and in fact, you'll have the option in the annual information statement to have a statement of resources and commitments. So this is the sort of thing that says, well, look, we do have a commitment to, say, pay some superannuation or some leave or whatever to staff ongoing. You'll have to meet that commitment. So it gives you a sense of, okay, you not only have cash at the moment, you have some costs hanging over your head. And resources, well, you know, especially in rural areas, there's usually a hall, you know, a hall which used to be a church hall, or maybe is now a school hall, or it's a community hall, or whatever. And it's yours. And it's better to say that this is part of your asset base. Excuse me. Now, I know that many of those halls are in fact quite a burden because there are a lot of costs associated with them. So again, our purpose here, and the government's purpose here, is not that we trawl through and see whether you've got a dollar amount of the value of the hall correct. No, not at all. It's just to provide the full picture, really, to yourself, to say, we're going okay this year, but we've got the hall there, which has, you know, it's an asset, but it also has commitments, and we have a staffer member half-time, and he has to be paid a certain amount and has superannuation commitments. That's all it is, and you'll put that in the AIS, and we'll provide some good advice for that online. Now, number 14, a bit more complex. It's the related party disclosures. Look, it's been an ongoing debate for a long time that charities will often work closely with individuals who have relationships to the charity. You know, brother, sister, uncle, auntie, best mate who just starts to do work for the charity. I know how it begins. But you need to disclose these relationships to make sure that you are getting best value for the money that the charity dollar purchases. So we will provide advice on this, the meaning of related party disclosures. But again, the idea is to make obvious to all and sundry how you're running it, and whether you're running it for the charitable purpose. And number 15 is remuneration. This will affect large charities only. There may be some of yours, but we'll provide advice because we're still working out some of the details with Treasury on the meaning of who is a key character whose remuneration will be measured. Some will say it's someone on the board, some will say it's just the CEO and senior staff. We'll work through that, but the point is, very soon, there'll have to be a disclosure of remuneration for senior people who work in large charities. Okay, now let's flip our focus and talk about governance, which, you know, you run entire conferences about this sort of stuff, and it's very important. If you get it right, no one talks about it, needs to talk about it. So from our perspective, this is the simple question. If I come knocking on your door, not that likely, we will ask this question: show us your thinking. Show us how you made a decision to spend money or to make a purchase or run a program. Now, we never stand in your shoes and say, I could have done it better than that, because I wouldn't know how to do your job. But I am entitled, on behalf of the public, Commonwealth of Australia, to know how you made a decision and that you can demonstrate that your money is used for charitable purpose. And the best way to answer that question is just keep good records of your financial and operational decisions. Now, if we come knocking on your door, and let me give you some figures, there are 60,000 charities on the register. We investigate 80 or so a year, mainly by a complaint, and it's often, unfortunately, fraud or private benefit. So when we do come knocking on the door, these are the sorts of things, the 5 governance standards we walk in the door with the ruler. And one is to stick to your purpose. You will need to prove that you have information about your charitable purpose available to the public. Now, that's pretty easy because we're really talking about your key document, your constitution or whatever, and you just post it on the ACNC register. We're doing a little exercise at the moment actually to trawl through the 60,000, and a few have put on, I don't know, recipes for mum's scones rather than the primary document. But anyway, we're getting rid of those and cleaning up the register. But it is important that you inform the public, that's the deal, when you register, of your intent. And the best way is to post your constitution or articles of association or whatever. Now, second, you have to be accountable to your members. Now, that's pretty easy, although in COVID times it's been more difficult to hold an AGM, but you need to go a little bit further than that. No shenanigans. Give them time for question and answer. Give them time for opportunities to propose and vote on resolutions. Provide them with an annual report, and of course you hold election for executive positions. Sometimes hotly contested, sometimes you have to rope people into the job. I know, we've all been there. Third one, pretty simple, just comply with Australian laws, don't break the law. It's a very rare event that charities do so. The fourth one, a bit more complicated. You really have to do some due diligence on the people you draw onto the committee or become trustees. You're basically, they're not undischarged bankrupts and so on. We don't have any other rules to do with suitability. That would be quite complex. So that's pretty simple, but it's a little reminder to ask some questions about the suitability of the people you want to invite to come on to the committee. And the last one is to behave responsibly. The broad term, act in good faith in the charity's best interests. Don't misuse your position. In other words, you cannot have any personal private gain in the charity. Now that can be a little difficult, I know, when you're the person who established a charity and it's your baby, or you're, especially in your field, I would imagine, vitally interested in the topic. It doesn't mean to say you don't have a personal investment of your time and passion and life's experience. It just means always think in terms of the best interests of the entire group, the charity. And of course, there's a little example, there are any conflicts of interest, or there's a related party transaction, someone you know who's providing services to the charity, disclose it, put it on the table. You may have to exclude yourself from a discussion about a particular contract or whatever. No problem, just be very open in the way you do these things. Now, the good news is that, what have I got there? You don't have to be a genius to be on a committee. Thank goodness for that. These are your protections. If, and this is true right at the moment, the schools have been asking us about whether kids should mask up or be excluded from school or should come into school or whatever. And they're finding the weight of making certain decisions, usually in conjunction with principals, headmasters. And our answer is, well, if you rely on professional or expert advice, so you know, reading material from the Chief Medical Officer's website or whatever, then that's fine. You've done your job. You have sought decent advice, and if you have a really bright mum or dad out there who's a doctor, lawyer, whatever, and has a different view, that's okay. You can point to a source of professional or expert advice, let's say a chief medical officer, who advises the following. You're not expected to be that expert. You're not expected to know everything. You are asked to do your homework diligently. And that goes to the second protection, make decisions in good faith and to not have a personal interest in the decision. And the third one, take all reasonable steps to prevent charity from trading insolvent. It really goes back to that question I was talking about earlier, that you need to know what your liabilities are down the track. You might have a certain amount of money in your bank account for the charity, but you might have some liabilities coming up in the next 6 months that you may or may not be able to meet. So this stuff never goes away, I know. It's a trial for all charities and for all businesses, but you need to take reasonable steps to prevent the charity. Doesn't mean to say things won't go badly, but again, show us your thinking if they do. And the last one, of course, and gosh, of course this happens because of illness or whatever. You couldn't take part in the management of the charity. Well, you know, record that. Make sure that someone is aware that you were not available, and that's your protection. You will have seen to have acted in good faith. Okay, now, look, if your charity is a corporation, you will really by now have to have a director ID, which will be a unique number that you'll carry with you forever and a day. And that actually helps, well, mainly the tax office, I think, but regulators like myself to know who that person is, who's a responsible person. At the moment, we're not sure. We might have a name, Billy Smith, and we don't know of the 3 Billy Smiths on the register who it is. So this is the Commonwealth's much broader picture than ours, trying to have a unique identifier for each person. So you'll need to fairly shortly, if you haven't already, make sure, if you're a director, you have one of these IDs, and there are some dates by which you must comply. Now, I'm running pretty quickly here because no doubt I'll run out of time. These dates will be available to you in the presentation. So let me now skip into the really fun stuff. Okay, e-learning. Now, we did a little exercise, oh gosh, 2 or more years ago, where we paid a firm a lot of money to provide better education material for responsible persons, you know, the secretary presidents of charities who want to know how to run the charity or how to comply with regulations. And after spending a lot of money, they came up with a lot of dot points, which I was not really happy with. And it seems to me we learn by doing. We're a bit more visual. I don't want someone just to print off some dot points from our website, hand it out at the AGM or the executive meeting and say, there it is, I've complied, I understand. I think we can do better than that. So we've had a very skillful person come in, an educator, and create 12 electronic learning programs, which you will be able to dial into and improve your skills in running a charity, as well as the compliance measures you'll need to comply with in running the charity. And you know, they're each of 1 or 2 hours long, and you can do whatever you like, or you can build them into the complete run of them. Depends on your needs, and you can actually receive a certificate at the end. Now, it doesn't, you know, it's not the PhD, but you get some proof that you have been through these e-learning courses. And how are we going for time? I'm a bit conscious of that.
Yep, we've got 10 minutes. You're doing well.
Easy. Well, I'm going to settle back now and talk about my favourite topic of all time, and then take questions, of course. Now, I was very conscious when I came to this job 4.5 years ago that it's very hard to find what charities did, and the Act told me that I had to inform the public of the work of the sector. And the only instrument I had was this thing called the Annual Information Statement. And it was all about a charity and its credentials. Here's your responsible persons, here's your balance sheet, here's your AIS, your accounts and so on. And that's very important. But it seemed to me that it didn't tell me the story of what you do. So we eventually arrived at a position, and you should know this by now, when you fill out the annual information statement, we no longer ask you about what your major program is. Sorry, your major activity. We now ask you what your major program is. And you can have up to 10 programs that describe what you do for your beneficiaries. And this was done in the 2020 annual information statement. And you've now started to put them into the 2021 annual information statement. The beauty of this is not only do you have 60,000 charities, which you can search here on the register, as you always have been. When you go into the same place on the website, you'll have this thing called Search by Charity Program. There are 80,000 programs on the register now. So if you don't know the name of a charity, it doesn't matter. You can go after the program that suits you, and you can search for that program in 3 different ways: by the type of activity or service, its location, and the people it helps. So we'll flip down, and you can just type in words that describe something that interests you. I don't know if you put patient network in what you'd find, but you have a go, because there are thousands of words in there that will help you get to something on this list. There are 800 categories of charity program on the list. And when you find one that's, say, community development that's of interest to you, you further click and it'll have further subdivisions. And you select that subdivision of programs. Then you can look at who the charity helps. So the sort of people might be young ones, old ones, animals, etc., etc. Tick those, or any or all of them. That's up to you. And then, of course, especially if you're new to town, you want to look at where the program might be. And when you've selected your criteria, you press the button. This is what we call the map view. There it is. You'll get the charities that pop up that are of interest to you in those areas. You'll also get a list, but you can also click on a list view, you'll get a list of charities. So for the first time ever, anyone can come to our website not knowing the name of a charity, but want to help. Or you might run a charity and want to see who else is doing similar things. I'm quite amazed. I don't know, this is logical entirely, but not all charities know who else are doing similar things in their field. Now they'll be able to find out, and you'll be able to collaborate, work with them, learn from them, and so on. You know, not everyone has to reinvent the wheel. And so we're very proud of that. And in fact, tomorrow in Melbourne, we'll be launching this. We've had a soft launch last December, so all the information's in there. But now tomorrow, March 1 in Melbourne, we'll have the official launch. And when the minister presses the button, fingers crossed, it'll all work, as I'm sure it will. And thank you, and more than happy to take questions.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you, Gary, for that presentation. I'm just looking to see in the chat if anybody has got any particular questions. Certainly there's been a lot of work done and a lot of development done by the ACNC. I'll just put myself back on video, sorry. There you go. By the ACNC over the last couple of years. Someone has been around for a little while. I just have a question that's always fascinated me, and that is around standardisation of how a percentage of fundraising is calculated by the ACNC. To those of us who've been submitting audited financial returns, this has been a perennial issue, really. You know, some people calculate their percentages in one way and others in other ways, and there doesn't appear to be a standardisation across the board. Could you just comment on that, please?
Yeah, and it's a good question. It's a percentage of the source of your funds. Nothing to do with fundraising, but I know you didn't mean that, but just to put that aside. So it's pretty clear, I think, from our material in the AIS and from material on our website, how to distinguish, you know, government from government grants and contracts from other monies that come to you via donations or monies that come to you via charging for services. You're quite right, though, that in accounting terms, there is no national standard of accounting that I could rely on to say, you assigned a certain dollar to certain activities. That standard does not occur. And I had this meeting with the Australian Accounting Standards Board 4.5 years ago, and they were concerned to do something, and 4.5 years on, it's not happening, right? So putting that, and that's not to criticise anyone, that's not going to happen in my time, probably yours. But what is clear enough, though, is that the source of funds, whether it's government or by way of donations and bequests, or by way of charging for services, is reasonably clear. You should be able to distinguish those and put it in. But the important thing, Anne, is that there's no rule. We're not saying, oh, you have to have a percentage from one or other of those sectors. It's none of our business. It's really, in this game, I go for visibility. Who are you? Or one of the questions is where your money comes from. That explains a lot. And that's why that very early one PowerPoint I posted on, you know, give us an idea of where your grants come from. It's not the fineness, Anne, of that last dollar that you might allocate. It's that broader picture of where your money comes from. And that dovetails very nicely with our work on your programs. Again, I don't decide which category you want to slot your programs in or how many you have. I've been to lots of charities and they say, oh, well, we've got 2 programs, or maybe it's 3. Because you know what it's like, you do different things at different times. It's up to charities you take this as an opportunity to tell your story about how many programs you've got and where. Similarly, you tell your story about the source of your funds. I don't see it as a compliance activity in as much as I say, I'm not going to hit you over the head. Your numbers should be correct, of course, but it just helps answer the question of who you are and where you're from. I'll just give you a little example, and I do spend a lot of time in rural Australia because, like your previous speaker, I think that's where the needs are greatest and the resources are fewest. But often I'll go to a charity, and although they carry the name charity, they don't do any fundraising. They are a not-for-profit service delivery organisation with all of the people in uniforms and so on. And that's their business. But when I ask whether they do any fundraising, they just say, no, we just bid for contracts from state government, Commonwealth government. And I think it's as well that anyone looking at that charity understands the business model. But I make no comment. It's not for me to say good, bad, or indifferent. It's just that, oh, that's what you do.
Yep.
And a number of the charities that I visited there do wonderful work, often in aged care in remote rural communities.
A really important question that many of us ask ourselves is around what opportunities do you see to streamline the number of active charities to reduce duplication in some areas?
That's a good question. It's not my business to tell some enthusiastic people who meet the requirements to register. And I don't believe any government will ever say, no, that's enough, we've had enough. From an economist's point of view, the question is how many charities should there be to run this sector efficiently? And I can tell you there's a quite definite answer. It's somewhere between 1 and 25 million. So we don't know. But an economist would also say, well, if people have a good visibility of what's available, they can begin to ask questions. And charities themselves can begin to see who else is in the field. So I'm actually hoping in our charity marketplaces where you look for programs, I think it might lead to some thinking about how many charities are doing what and where. But that's up to, I tell you, we had 4.5 million searches of the register last year. So that's not 4.5 million people, that's a lot of people searching. So I think that's the answer. The answer is a lot of people finding simple, powerful information about what charities do and for whom and where, and let the market decide thereafter.
Gary, thank you very much for your presentation. That was very informative. And on behalf of the committee, we thank you for presenting and joining us today.